All right, folks. So I'm really psyched to have Karen Hartfield here from Venice, Florida. I reached out to Karen and got really interested in her practice around setting boundaries with her patients and how she teaches them to do so. That's really important. She's a licensed mental health counselor. And I think even more interestingly, her background is as a massage therapist before she came to counseling. And she's a registered sandplay practitioner with the Sandplay Therapists of America. So we're going to touch on all things boundaries, how to set them, what they are, why they work, when they're pushed and when that's okay, and how they relate to overall health. And we're also going to touch on non-typical holistic ways of therapy, which should be really interesting for folks and different. So Karen, welcome to Green Pill. So psyched to have you. Maybe you could just tell us a bit about yourself, how you got here, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate being here, Alex. Thanks for having me. Yes, I am a licensed mental health counselor, and I am working south of Sarasota in Venice, Florida. And it's really interesting as I look back over my life, it feels like so many of the things that I have done throughout my life in college and the travel and my career and everything has gotten me to this place. And it feels like I use so much of that in my practice. It feels really like I've come full circle. In college, my undergrad degree was in theater, and we did a lot of yoga and body awareness. Um, Talked about actually Carl Jung, the Swiss psychotherapist, was one of the people that we studied in theater because it was learning about how to go down and discover ourselves and find the dark side and the light side and bring everything together. So I was exposed to Carl Jung within that context. I was exposed to yoga. And then as I moved through my life, I became a massage therapist as well, had my own practice with that. And then I became even more aware of the body and how the body holds so much of our experience. And so I think my approach became more and more holistic as I have gone through my life. And then about 12, 15 years ago, I actually went back to school to become a mental health counselor because I knew my body wouldn't take doing massage forever. And so, when I went back to school with that, I also found sandplay therapy, which is based on Carl Jung's theories. So it feels like here I am at this beautiful moment in my life, able to use all of these different experiences and what I've learned throughout the years in the practice that I have, and I'm able to offer that and offer that understanding and experience to the people that come in to see me.
Amazing. And I'm so psyched to touch on all things holistic, because these boundaries sometimes we establish between disciplines and yeah, you're treating people, and you're a person who has a multitude of interests and backgrounds and life experiences, and you can bring those to bear. I think boundaries is something we can touch on later. I think folks are probably excited. I'm excited to find out more about the sandplay therapy and actually more about Carl Jung. If you can just distill, his theories and how they differ from other theories briefly for folks, and then touch on sandplay. Yeah.
Okay, well, I can say right now I will not do this justice, but very briefly, Carl Jung was actually a student of and worked with Freud, and so Freud was one of the first, he was the first psychoanalyst, and talked about the unconscious, and Carl Jung and he were colleagues, and at one point Carl Jung had some difference of opinion with Freud, and they sort of broke and went into different directions. But Carl Jung is the one who has developed the idea of the archetypes, about energies that things that hold certain energies, the power of the unconscious, and he really felt he had a very spiritual journey too, and he really felt that what happens in the unconscious really has a huge impact on the way we live. And so learning to access some of that, have a relationship with it as it comes to the surface, as we're able to, is a way of knowing ourselves and being able to more fully and clearly live our lives. And again, that is just a small synopsis, but so it's basically depth psychology. which has to do with looking at the unconscious materials, not just not just looking at what is seen on the surface. So when someone comes to me, there are therapies called like short-term therapies that are really focused on goal setting and getting things accomplished, and those have their place. Like, I'm trying to figure out how to relate with my mother-in-law, or my boss at work is really giving me a lot of headaches. How do I deal with that? And so you can work specifically on that level, but you can also look at it and say, what's going on beneath the surface? What's really happening? What's driving this? Why are you repeating behaviors again and again? And so often that you have to do a lot of digging and look back to what has happened long ago, or what is coming up from things that we have pushed down. We repress a lot of things in order to live in society, but those things need to be seen and addressed. And that's what I mean by the shadow side. The shadow side is, according to Jung, is anything that we do not want to see about ourselves, or aren't able to see about ourselves. And so we need to look at those things as we're working. And that's what I'm open to as I work with people in therapy, being aware that is one of the components. It's not just change your behavior, do this and this and this, and change your behavior. There's often more to it than that.
And so with Jung focusing on archetypes and the unconscious, well, first let's just briefly define. For me, consciousness, and something I've talked about a lot lately, is where you shine your light, what you pay attention to. Would you more or less agree with that?
Yeah, I think that is, I would call that awareness. Self-awareness, awareness. And I think, we're talking semantics here, right? Depending on who you're speaking with, they'll have a different definition of it. But I think I understand this, and I've seen this used before, and I really love the visual of, consider yourself a triangular shaped iceberg, okay? All right, so the top of the triangle is floating above the water, right? You can see that above the water. And that is our consciousness. That's what we're aware of. And we're thinking, oh, I see myself, I know why I'm doing this, here I am. But in the reality, the huge part of ourselves and what's dragging us around in different places is under the water, right? We are not aware of that. But it has a huge impact on that piece that we actually can see. And then the added layer, and the added layer to that then is that we are all actually floating in the ocean with other icebergs. So there's also the idea of the collective unconscious, where we're all in it and we all have access to all these other energies from mythology and ancient history. And you wonder sometimes why scientists on one end of the world and scientists on the other end of the world end up inventing something or discovering something at the same time. It's because it's in that collective field. So we only see the little tip of the iceberg, and we think that's us, and we know all about ourselves, but in reality we know very, very little.
And so conscious being, or let's just say awareness as a proxy, with the iceberg metaphor, most of it's hidden. So if you take a nature-nurture perspective, or just using that metaphor, then a lot of the unconscious is both nurture, so what's happened since we're 0 years old that we don't particularly remember, but of course affects us, and then also the collective unconscious, which is the acculturation, any real cultural understandings that come to us through TV, through our parents, through anything. And then maybe there's even a meta unconscious, which we could tap into. Some people call the source, and we can go there, and I'd like to. So did Jung believe in this meta unconscious, which transcends time in a way, and it's something that we can all tap into, if I'm getting that right, or we're all connected to anyway, like it's the ocean, right?
To it, and whether or not we can tap into it or consciously is a different thing. He was very clear about the power of the unconscious, and how it's much larger than we think it is. And sometimes people who have who have psychotic breaks or who have certain mental health conditions. It's sometimes has to do with the fact that, possibly, this is one theory, right? That the veil, or the barrier between the conscious and the unconscious, is not really intact. And so people are tapping into that, and they're living essentially in like this world of the dream world, right? Because they're tapping into unconscious materials, and they do not have the ego strength, within themselves. They don't have the ego strength, for whatever reason, to be able to say, oh, this is my reality, and the other.
Wow, and that gets into issues of self versus other, right? One, two, it gets into questions of boundaries, right, which we'll get to later, and then it gets into, I like the bifurcation you made between short-term fixing, and that probably sits on the awareness level. My boss, my mother-in-law, which is really important because people are, suffering, and they come to you probably with those issues first at times, and then it gets deeper and say, well, wait a minute, how were all your other bosses, or how were your relations with your other not mother-in-laws, but people who have some control over your life, but you don't want in your life, maybe, or you didn't choose. How do power dynamics play out in your life? And so you start to go down that journey and explore the past, and then people say, oh, wait a minute, I didn't remember this, but this happened, or this was always the case. And so I guess, could you help me understand that? I figure, like, typical psychoanalysis, in my understanding, not even typical, I'm really not well versed enough to say, my understanding of psychoanalysis is you do go back to your parents. Everyone hears nowadays about trauma. Everyone hears nowadays about um, different attachment styles, which are really big due to the book Attached, I believe. And that's quite interesting, where you have secure attachment style, you have anxious avoidant, you have a couple others which you could probably help me fill in. And so I find that, like, if you could maybe show us how the Jungian perspective, and then getting into sandplay, differs from just what I think about as the typical, well, talk about what your parents did, talk about what your childhood was like, which traumas did you experience? Because I do feel like they're different, but I might be, yeah, if you could help us kind of keep defining the terms here, so then people know where we're at. If you could just touch on how Jungian, how you think about it, really just how you think about it relative to what's mainstream today.
Well, and I guess I haven't studied mainstream. I had my I haven't specialized in anything other than, and actually I started specializing in more in the depth psychology when I started the sandplay therapy process, because that taps into that more. And I think a lot of therapies, yes, will look at what happened in your past and look at patterns, and those things are really important. I think that there's something about the Jungian approach, especially with the sandplay, that taps into something that it allows something to come up that we may not otherwise see. And specifically with the sandplay therapy, and Carl Jung did not create sandplay therapy. Carl Jung was a neighbor of the woman who created sandplay therapy, and Dora, her name was Dora Koff. She was obviously in Switzerland, in Zurich, and she worked with Carl Jung's daughter, who was also a therapist. Okay, so and so Dora Koff based this on basically the three legs of sandplay therapy are depth psychology, the Jungian approach, and then there was a woman named Margaret Lowenfeld, who worked with children, and she had the world technique, and she had toys and sand for children. And so Dora had worked with her. And then also Dora Koff had housed some Buddhist monks when they had been ousted from their homeland and had nowhere to go, or some such like that. And so they lived with her and for a period of time, and she became very familiar with their approach. So Buddhism is actually the third leg of the sandplay therapy concept, which is, in Buddhism, what is taken from there is that idea of holding space, of allowing the fact that there is mystery We hold space, we honor space, and we let happen what happens. We do not have a particular agenda. We are present. So it is with sand play therapy. I have 2 trays of sand, and they're rectangular, and one is filled with damp sand, one is filled with dry sand, and people can play in the sand. They can create in the sand. They can dig around. They can do whatever they want to. And they also then can go to the shelves. I have shelves filled with miniatures. These are little toys. They are little statues. They are rocks and stones and things that I've collected from traveling and people have given me. And I have hundreds and hundreds of little items that people can choose. Or sometimes the items choose the people, right? We encourage people just to take whatever is calling them. And they can put that in the sand and play with it in the sand or create a world in the sand. And very often then we just spend time with that. We just look at it. I ask people how they feel as they look at it, if anything comes to the surface. We do not try to analyze it. We don't try to define what everything is. I think that's your mother, and over there's your this. We're not doing that, but we are allowing whatever has come up to be there and to see it. And basically, it's a way for something unconscious to show up in the tray. Because when let's say someone picks a little cat and puts it in the tray, well, on the conscious level, it may be that their cat peed on the carpet this morning, and so they were thinking about the cat and they're mad at the cat. So they put it in there because they were thinking about it. So that's the conscious level. On their unconscious level is that cat also represents a whole lot of other stuff to them underneath that they may or may not be aware of, but they're bringing all that with the cat. And then the third level, of course, is what does the cat mean on the collective unconscious level? What is the symbolism of the cat throughout history and then the mythology of the cat? So all of that is held. We don't know what that is. We look at that and I'm not like going, oh, I know all of these things about this person right now. But that is all in the tray. So very often when someone creates a tray and just looks at it, it's sort of like considering a dream that they've had. You know how you have images in a dream and sometimes they're real clear and other times you're not quite sure what everything is. But the fact that you've dreamt it and you're thinking about it changes something in you. It brings something up. You see it differently because it's no longer just unconscious. It has become conscious. It's something you can see. The unconscious has no language. There are no words in the unconscious. So, but in symbols, the unconscious is filled with symbols. So when we see the symbol, then we begin to articulate around it. Or we just see it and we feel it, and that can begin to make a difference. And it's really amazing how people who work in the sand, it really makes a difference in how they move through their process. It's a wonderful supplement. Some people come in and just do a process in the sand, and they'll spend the entire session in the sand. Other times people will come in and create a tray for a few minutes, and we'll look at it, talk about it, and then we'll go on and do more talk.
Mm-hmm. And when people are doing just 45 minutes or 50 minutes in the sand, what are you talking about throughout? Are you just hanging out, watching, kind of talking about the weather? I mean, I don't mean to be, yeah, I'm just curious what gets talked about?
Well, it varies because sometimes people will come in and just sit and play in the sand while we talk. And I think that in itself is grounding because it affects the brain in a different way. It's calming, it's grounding. But that is different than when people, and I allow the tray to be used that way too, right? But people who create an actual tray, no, we don't really talk. They just create the tray. Maybe they will make some comments as they're doing this, like, oh, I just love this little thing, or I don't know why this is here, whatever. But we do not talk about things. They can create a tray in complete silence. They can create a tray in silence, and then we look at the tray and they can leave, and that can be the session. It can be that powerful. And often I do have people who will say, I don't know why that is in the tray, but it just needed to be there, right? And people can have a real emotional response sometimes when they look at their tray. So for when they're creating the tray, and that's where that Buddhist part really comes again and again too, is that I am really there to hold the space for them and to see them. Part of it is about being seen, we being witnessed and holding that. They're not doing this just by themselves. They are doing this in the presence of someone who is there specifically to support them and see them. And that in itself can be really healing. Of course, this is wonderful for kids. Some kids want to sit down and come in and sit down and plop in front of me and go, okay, we need to talk. And they are very verbal. Yes. I've had some of those kids and they just want to talk the whole time. They're very articulate. But a lot of kids don't know what they want to talk about, aren't comfortable talking. And so they go and they play in the sand. And that's fine. They are doing the work. Something else that happens in the sand is that, and this has been, research has been done on this now. This is research backed, that there's something that happens neurologically in the sand, that when people work the sand and smooth and rework it, things change in the brain. Things settle in the brain. It can reconnect things that have been damaged. Again, I'm not the best person to speak about this. I don't know that I'm speaking about it clearly enough, but trauma, difficulties, frustrations, all of these things create an unregulated, a dysregulated system in the brain, sometimes regulation. And actually working in the sand, physically working the sand, can help to recreate regulation. It can help to create regulation in the brain simply by the fact that people are working the sand.
So autonomic nervous system kind of goes into parasympathetic state, sympathetic being activated, where fight or flight. We all hear about fight, flight, or fawn, and it sounds like the sand play, both being observed and being in space with a healing, someone you brought on to help you heal. So the intention for that hour is 45 minutes is to heal and take care of oneself. So that's in itself calming. You've made the decision to be there. Second, you get the tactile feel of the sand, of your quiet space, which I'm sure is quite zen and relaxing. And then third, you get play, which we don't have a lot of as adults, for sure. And play itself, probably even rewiring the brain around play, like re-experiencing play as an adult in a safe way, where maybe in the past it might not have been safe. So and then the symbolism and you go from the real-time symbolism at the surface to the deeper symbolism of that person's life, to the deeper symbolism of, why do cats have meaning in our society? Why do people all get cats and not pigs, and not another animal that's easy to keep like a rabbit, but it's a cat for some reason? So what's the symbolism there? And why did that person get the cat in the first place? Cat peed on the carpet. Oh, I'm mad. But you bought that cat. You brought that cat into your life. Cats pee on carpets. So what made you bring that animal, that thing into your life? So I can see that this connection between each of those levels of play, of healing, of being present, and of rewiring and calming. That's amazing. I don't think many people know about sand play therapy. At least I haven't heard of it. What other holistic stuff practices, modalities do you recommend or do with folks to get them in touch with their bodies and in touch with themselves, beyond just cognitively?
Yeah. I often do breathing practices with people. Yeah, because as a means of sometimes to calm people before they start a session, if they're really feeling like they can't focus and they're too stressed, we will sometimes start the practice with a little bit of breathing, or we simply do it during the session so that people can learn how to do it. Because people who are, a lot of people have a lot of anxiety. That's just the reality these days. And so again, our systems, if we live in that constant state of fight or flight, our systems need a break. We are revving high the whole time, and that causes breakdown in the system ultimately, right? Emotionally, physically, a lot of things. So even if people can, for a period of time, breathe and calm their system, it may not change everything in their surroundings or in their circumstances, but if they're able to calm down for that period of time, it gives their body a break. It changes the what's going on chemically in their body, and then they can perceive the world a little bit differently. And it literally has just given their body a break, and their body needed it, right? So we try breath work, different ways of breathing and counting, and we just try different.
Which ones do you like? If you, I'm sorry to interrupt you briefly. If you wouldn't mind, I think it's always good to have little takeaways. Which methods do you use? Which ones are your go-to, and any of them which people could take away and try themselves?
Yes, I have three that I particularly like, and I know that there are a lot of them out there, and I think they're all great. As
Yeah,
long
you
as
can't
we're
hurt yourself.
focused on it.
Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah.
One that I use a lot is box breathing, and
Okay,
maybe you're
heard of
familiar
that.
with all of these.
Not too
Again,
much. No.
you breathe in on a count of 4, and then you hold for a count of 4, and that's like the top of the box. You breathe in, you're coming up the side, right? You breathe, you hold it, and that's the top of the box. Then you breathe out, and that's the other side of the box, and then you just rest or you hold for those last 4. And sometimes when you think of it as the box, it makes it easier to do the counting part of it. So you breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, you let it go for 4, and then you just rest for 4. And then you breathe in, and so it's box breathing. It's real simple to remember.
Okay, so it's one of your go-tos. And how many of those do folks do? Would typically like would you do a 5-minute protocol if people did it at home, or I mean, you could. It's not going to hurt to do 10, I'm sure. But what would
No,
you think?
absolutely, absolutely. I encourage people to do it at home for 3 to 4 minutes, and to start out with, and then if they can do it longer, that's great. Again, it just gives you a break, right?
And do they set a timer? So sometimes when I breathe, I don't want to look at my phone. The phone gives me some
Mhm.
anxiety, and then so do you ever have them count breaths as well, yeah? Would you do a count maybe, or
If you want to. Yeah, I think it really has to do with what works for you. Excuse me. I think maybe setting a timer is a good thing, a gentle timer, not a blaring timer,
yeah, change
because
the
it might
alarm
shock
sound on
you.
the timer?
Hmm.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And
Nice.
another one that I like is, and this
Mhm.
one apparently is, I've heard that it's especially good for trauma, for healing
Okay.
trauma. And that is, so you breathe in, for this one, you breathe in on 4,
Okay.
and then you don't hold it. You just let it out for 8. So the out
Huh.
breath is longer than the in breath.
I see.
I think it helps to release a little bit more.
I
Okay,
heard
so
that
that's another
recently
one.
too.
Okay.
Okay. 4 and 8.
And then another one that's really good, especially when you are trying to sleep at night.
Hmm.
It's to breathe in, and on the inhale, just think inhale 1, and you breathe out exhale 1. Then you breathe in again, inhale 2, you breathe out exhale 2, and you just continue that way. But anytime you forget where you are, or your mind drifts or whatever, you just go back to 1. Inhale 1, exhale 1. You just go back there again, so that you might get to 17, and if you lose where you are, whatever, you just go back to 1. It doesn't matter how far you get, but so there's no stress as to like, oh wait, what number was I on? Where was, you're not bringing yourself out of that relaxation to try to figure something out. So that's a nice one that I have found to go to sleep to.
And if I guess you could get to 50 and maybe 100, and if you're still not asleep, maybe you maybe just relax and okay, I did it. I feel good. I feel a little bit better. Maybe I read a book, or maybe I just chill,
Right.
kind of
And
thing.
I think one of the important one of the and this is something I used to tell my kids too, if they couldn't sleep and they get all stressed because they had school tomorrow or whatever. It's that, just remember that your body is resting. Even if you're not sleeping, you are resting. So just allow yourself to rest, even if you can't sleep. Just allow
I
yourself.
really love that. I really love that because sleep anxiety, not to, we have to put a stamp on like with a TM on every single term we make up these days. But it's true. People get anxiety about not sleeping. And I love that. And, I do some sleep coaching with folks who, I throw a wearable on them and I give them a few suggestions on how to prepare for sleep, blackout curtains, cold room, lavender pillow. But that one's a great protocol. I think because people don't, when they're like, oh, I can't sleep, tomorrow's going to be horrible because I'm not going to have enough sleep. And then when I don't have enough sleep, I know these physiological changes happen. And it's like, okay, you're resting though. You are resting. And non-sleep deep rest I heard of too. Yeah, go ahead,
Well,
please.
yeah, it's just that idea of acceptance. You know, when we can really accept where we are and just say, okay, I'm not sleeping right now. That's okay. You know, that concept of acceptance is just huge, and it can be very life changing, because so much of what we do is we are like, oh, it should be this way. I need it that way. I need it, and sometimes that's legit. It would be helpful if you could sleep, right? but legit or not, if we're so focused on what we need and what we're not getting in any area of our life, that creates resistance, and it creates frustration, and it just adds to whatever's going on already, right? So accepting it takes off one layer of anguish and frustration, even if it doesn't change the situation.
Uh-huh. And anxiety is, I think, desiring, worry about the future, right? And then I guess anger is, to me, worry about the past. I mean, it's also kind of a future-oriented emotion, because you're afraid maybe, and you're protecting yourself so this thing doesn't happen. And fear, sorry, and then fear is afraid of the future. Anxiety is, I guess, yeah, maybe I don't know how you define the difference between anxiety and fear. I do find that people nowadays are pretty anxious. Was it like that when you first started practicing massage, or when you first started in therapy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the anxiety has always been around, but yeah,
Okay.
that it's like skyrocketing now with, with everything, with all the news and everything at our fingertips, and the pace of
Hmm.
everything, and
Hmm.
it's kind of nuts. Yeah,
Is it?
everybody's
Yeah.
really, yeah, it's gotten a lot worse, and I'm seeing in younger and younger kids serious
Wow.
anxiety. Yes, and I
Serious
so
anxiety.
and I think one of the things that I have heard is that fear is something that you're afraid of something specific,
Okay.
like you have a
Specific.
fear of something specific.
Uh-huh.
And anxiety is just a generalized sense of something's going on. I don't know, I don't know that I can handle this, but there's not a specific fear. And I don't know if that holds true the whole way, but that's
That's how you think. That's one of the ways to think about it. Yeah. So fear is specific, anxiety is general. And either way, it's future oriented, and I mean, if you have a fear like, tomorrow my boss is going to do this, and if I'm not slept enough, then I'm going to be worse able to handle it. And so anxiety is, that's the fear, but then the anxiety is, well, I can't sleep right now, or I just feel anxious. I just feel anxious generally. And either way, you're worried about the future. And what the protocol you mentioned does, which says, hey, you're resting right now, it says, don't worry about what you can't control. Try your best to rest. You're doing your best. And it's this acceptance of where you are. Because, I mean, I find people who want to lose weight, as one example, who come to me when I was a trainer, and now I do more coaching around food as well as sleep as well as habits. And sometimes, like, I really want to lose this weight, and of course they want to lose it tomorrow. If they could get the surgery or something, they would. And I say, listen, accept where you're at. Can we hit a single? Can we get on base? We're not trying to hit a home run. Let's do 1% here. Let's do 1% there. But you first got to accept where you're at. And that's why you're calling me. You're calling me because you sleep 4.5 hours a night, or they're calling you because they really can't deal with whatever comes up when their mother-in-law goes to dinner with them. So let's understand, let's accept, hey, right now, this doesn't feel good, but I also don't need to change it this moment. I can take steps. It's
yeah, and
big.
and
Yeah.
and it is, and I think it comes down almost to that, and I use this example with my clients, that concept of reduction of harm. Which is like, and one of the examples I use is that, you know, people go into areas, medical professionals will go into areas and bring clean needles to people who are drug addicts in certain areas of a city, and it's kind of like, why would you do that? People should not be shooting up drugs. What are you doing, right? But you're not trying to solve the whole problem. You can't solve the whole problem, but you can decrease people's suffering, by making sure that they don't, get even more sick than they could otherwise, right? So the idea is you can reduce. So exactly like you said, you just reduce what's actually happening right now. Take one little bite of it. You don't have to take the whole thing. And I think that's the same thing with anxiety too. If people can, if they're at a level 7 with anxiety, sometimes they feel like it's only going to be okay if they're at a level 0 or level 1. That just is not going to happen. So when people can accept that, hey, I'm at 7, what can I do to get to a 6? Do I need to take some breaths? Do I need to wash my face? Do I need to think a thought or walk around the block? And then I'm at a 6. Hey, look at that. I'm at a 6 now, and that's more manageable.
I totally agree. I mean, it's pretty much you describe my whole philosophy to health, which is get a little bit better. You feel a little bit more in control. Because to me, actually, being healthy oftentimes is feeling in control. Because oftentimes we might, you have a baby or you switch jobs or you're traveling, you're going to gain some weight, and that's not even the most important thing. It's that you weren't exercising, so you don't get those endorphins that you're used to. Your body's waiting for the exercise, and the timing of some of the clocks in the body wait for that exercise or that sunlight or that food at the specific time it expects, and then you don't get it, so you feel dysregulated, and so you feel less healthy. And to me, it's like, what can we do to regain 1% of that control? Does that mean going around the block for a walk? Although it's not a workout, still get the nature, still get the outside. So I think for me, the biggest thing is getting those 1% and those little things. Okay, so we cook one meal for ourselves a day. Yeah, we're not cooking everything. We're still ordering takeout, but okay, when we order takeout, we hold the sauce, and that's it. And we're getting a little better, because it's all or nothing mindset. I don't know if it's an American thing. I doubt it. But I do find that people are super anxious nowadays. I was in New York for 8 years, and I myself was anxious, for sure. And I don't know what works. So you think the pace of things increased, and maybe that can get a little bit into our discussion around green pilling folks, in your patients, and how they when they want somebody in their life to be less anxious, or they want somebody in their life who's depressed to help them. How do you counsel them? Like, maybe you could tell an anecdote or a hypothetical on how to talk about health, not just for the patient, but for the patient's peer or for the patient's family.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? Because sometimes we have a real clear understanding, and we really do, of how somebody could be healthier, or what they could maybe do to help them to get healthier. And so, I do understand too. We're talking about boundaries, and we're talking about owning what's ours and letting someone else own what is theirs. And that's really important to understand. That going into anything is saying to yourself, what is it that is mine in this, and how do I take responsibility for it? And what is it that is theirs, and how did they take responsibility for it? And letting them take responsibility. So you have to have that clear understanding first. By the same token, if you are in a relationship with someone and you really truly care about somebody, then it is legitimate for you to approach them and say, I need to tell you this because I need to tell it to you. I'm not telling this to you because I'm trying to control you, but this is something I need to say for myself. And here's my concern for you. This is what I see. I'm saying this in love. I'm saying it because I want to support you, and I will say it one time to get it off my chest. And this is, I'm concerned about such and such and such, and whatever the situation is. I really want you to be healthy. If you want some help from me or support, you have got it. I will do whatever I can to support you. And I will also completely let you go and not talk about this again. I'm not going to harass you about this. But I had to say it for my sake. Okay. And then you drop it.
And then you drop it. And that checks the box for a lot of people, who are trying to help. Do you find that checks the box? Like, that gets cathartic in a way, that sends the message in a way from the person who cares to the person who may be suffering.
Right. Because the person who cares feels, I don't know if they feel an obligation, or they really are concerned, and they want to say something. So that gives them an opportunity to speak their heart. But it's really important then, in that sense, to again take responsibility for your own stuff. You're sharing this because this is important to you and you're concerned about them. But you're not sharing this because you want to get all up in their business and insist that they behave a certain way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Is that
It does. Yeah. Yeah. We talked about insisting actually when we spoke before this. And I think it's really hard to see someone suffer or just seemingly suffer and you feel like you can help and they don't probably want your help and they probably know like I work out a lot and I just found a lot of anecdotes from my own life where I'm like, wow, you'd really benefit from working out because you complain about not being confident, you complain about back pain, you complain about posture. It's like obviously working out would probably be the best solution. And I think for me, it's really hard to see change be possible, but not be able to do anything about it. And I think when I reflect, like you said, it's about me wanting to help, not so much about them, because everyone has their own lived experience, and they feel themselves, and they know that working out's an option, right? I guess you got to assume that people are intelligent, bright, capable, and aware generally. So when you say it once, you send the message might be I care, or the message might be purely factual, like I really think this would benefit you, and um I just want you to know because maybe you don't know, but I'm not going to hector you about it. I'm not going to bother you. Um and I think like with a lot of human relations reorienting towards, like you said, towards what you want to say and what you want to get out of it, for lack of a better word.
Mhm. And if you're clear about that within yourself,
Right.
that helps, right?
Can't fake it. Can't
Right.
fake it.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because if you have a sense of judgment about it, or
Mhm.
superiority, or whatever, you have to be really clear within yourself why you're saying what you're saying.
Can I give you a hypothetical? I've asked other folks, like if you have, folks have parents who are aging, and then, the parent ultimately, and it could also go for kids, but really the parent ultimately becomes a little bit more dependent on their kids over time, and if the parent is, drinking alcohol daily, smoking, whatever, we could just pick easy behaviors that sort of we can all agree that aren't great for our health. It ultimately redounds upon the child to then take care of the sick person. And how could you touch on that one for me, especially when the parent isn't nearby and you can't just go over and bring groceries, you can't be supportive other than virtually? I'd love to hear your take on that one. Tough
Well,
one, right?
yeah, it's a tough one, but it's also, I mean, there's so many variables with it.
Sure, sure.
So it's kind of hard to speak directly to it, because there's there are just so many variables with it. And it is, I also want to make the comment that it is really tough if you're in a relationship with someone, if you're married to someone and your spouse is refusing to take care of themselves physically.
Hmm.
And they're getting sicker and fatter and whatever, they just are not doing anything to take care of themselves. Then for you to say, okay, that's your business, it doesn't affect me, that's really hard, because that does affect you. It affects your life with that person. So it's not really clear where the boundaries are then, because you can't, if you're just saying I'm just taking care of myself and you take care of you, well, this impacts you in a real specific way, right? So it does get to be more challenging, and that requires really good communication. You have to be able to talk about those things, right? Regarding a parent or a child, especially someone who is like living in this space with you,
Hmm.
what we only really have control over what we're going to do, right?
Hmm.
So if someone is really, if a parent who's living nearby or far away, whatever, is drinking all the time,
Hmm.
and every time you talk to them, they are intoxicated, or they're missing doctor's appointments because of that, or whatever, you can say, you know what, I will be happy to call you on Monday evenings because that's our regular thing. But if you're intoxicated when I call you, I'm not going to have a conversation with you.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, so I mean, that's just one little example. But so regarding the particular question that you have, I mean, again, can you say that question again for me? If you
Sure,
have
sure.
parents who are, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, if they're, yeah, well, I guess it just goes back to what you said about having a partner or a spouse who ultimately does impact you. If they're really not taking care of themselves, that has an effect on your life. They're bringing in junk food to the house. They're slovenly, or they're just not feeling good. There's a sexual and romantic chemistry that can be touched on. So I guess what I'm trying to touch on, and that's just one example, is with a kid or with a parent, ultimately there's some dependence there because they need to be cared for. Your kids are your kids, and same, your parents are your parents. So it's a little bit challenging to draw the boundary, like you said, and because we do affect each other, and that's a tough one. I mean, how do you say, hey, I'm really worried about the fact that you drink every night? You say it once, and then they maybe don't change, and they're skipping the doctor's appointments. I guess, how can you help someone without offending them? How can you help someone without hurting them? Yeah, with the parent. I mean, the parent's a good one. The kids is a different story. I think a little bit, and you have kids too, so you would know, but because you want to help, right? You want to make them you want to help them get 1% better. Okay, if they drink 5 days a week, maybe they drink three, and or
Yeah,
you want
but
them to
even
start
that,
exercising.
yeah,
Yeah.
but even that, it's not are you supposed to be the police here? And that's why
Mm.
I think one of the reasons it's so difficult to talk about is because every case is a little bit different.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
almost like you have to have the specifics of this particular situation in front of you to be able to speak to it,
Mm-hmm.
because there are different nuances. I mean,
Mm.
what kind of a relationship has it been?
Uh,
What is, has this parent been abusive in the past, and now this person is supposed to be taking care of them, but it's hurting the person to do it? Has this been a
mm-hmm.
great relationship, and now there's an issue? Has this,
Mm.
all of these things have to be taken into consideration. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why it's so hard to speak to, because there aren't really, other than recognizing that there are boundaries and we need
Mm-hmm.
to take care of our own boundaries and let someone else take care of theirs. That sounds very good, but putting that in practice in
Mm.
specifics can be very challenging. And I know that there are people who struggle with that greatly here in my office, and it's hard to come up with what really works.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially with parents who are aging and maybe not thinking as clearly. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but again, I think that idea of, Mom, I show up over here to take care of you in the afternoons, and you are drunk and you're mean to me. I am not
Mm.
going to be coming back as long as you are cruel and saying mean
Mm-hmm.
things and drinking.
Mm-hmm.
I will
Mm-hmm.
not be back. But then the question, well, someone has to take care of this person,
Right.
right?
Right.
But so then in those situations, sometimes it becomes, if it really, really has to happen, then it's a matter of looking at, how do you take care of yourself? How do you,
Mm.
as the caregiver in this situation, approach this in a way that is okay for you and you will not
Mm-hmm.
be wounded? What do you have to
Mm-hmm.
tell yourself? How do you change your thinking on it, your response to it, your emotional well-being? What do you need to do for self-care? And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that's what it comes down to, because there are situations where there are no options, and here you are, you know. So, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to.
Yeah.
I think the really important thing is that we don't have to just suffer because somebody else isn't taking care of themselves. Even if we can't change the situation,
Mm-hmm.
how do we approach it so that we can be healthy? That's what our
Mm-hmm.
responsibility is, for us to
Mm-hmm.
take care of our own well-being and health, instead
Mm-hmm.
of just being thrown under the bus with it, or just like, oh well, I guess this is my lot in life. And
Yes, exactly. I really like the hypothetical we went into with the mom, drinking and being nasty, but the person needs care. She might be, 80 years old or have some health conditions, and you can't not care for the person. So either you set a boundary, and you can change your behavior with, I say, okay, mom, I will come over, but I'm not going to speak with you. I'm going to drop off your food, and we're not going to speak, because of course I would never abandon you, and I'm not okay with the way we communicate. And doing some own self inventory. Okay, what's a way I can approach this without getting hurt or getting hurt less? So again, it's those small steps, which I really like. And then maybe you can touch on the third aspect of communication, whether it be with a partner or a parent or a kid. Maybe asking them some questions about how they would like to better communicate, because if they're being nasty oftentimes they're trying to tell you something. People are always trying to tell each other something. So maybe you could get into the interviewing aspect, the open-ended questions, and how that's maybe worked for some of your patients, how you think about it. Because I like to do that myself.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful. And I think the attitude with which you approach it is really, really important. If you really are approaching it because you want information and you want to connect and communicate, that's a very different thing than having a particular energy of judgment, or I know what this is going to be like, that you bring to it. You really need to be there to learn. Excuse me. And even then, especially if it's a parent to a child, you're not always going to get the information. They don't necessarily want to communicate that. Um, but I think mirroring, talking about experiences, things that they may be feeling, accepting that, creating an environment where you are saying you want to learn, you want to hear from this person about what their experience is. That helps to create the environment, excuse me, where that can happen. I don't know that I answered that.
No, you did. You did genuine. You got to not just come at it as a ploy, like, okay, I'm going to ask them open-ended questions so that I can then turn around and tell them to go to addiction therapy, or I can tell them to go to the doctor. It's, hey, what makes you feel so cranky on a Monday? What makes you drink in the morning? Are you bored? I mean, you just got to ask. And I think it goes back to the partner too, like the spouse or the partner who's, let's just say, unhealthy, or maybe they're drinking, or maybe whatever they're doing that probably isn't the best for them. And of course, it's subjective. And I really respect what you said about needing to know, because that was a very professional and correct answer, right? You don't want to just generalize, because the nuances are so key. Um, I think getting really curious is hard sometimes, but I think that's probably the answer. So if folks take something away from this, it's one, take care of oneself's needs and say, how can I show up in this situation and be okay? Two, it's setting some boundaries, whether the actions, you still need to take care if you're in a caretaker role, but setting some boundaries and saying, I'll take care of you, but I won't talk to you if you're going to be like this. And three, it's exploring and saying, hey, what's making you this way? I noticed you seem distressed, and not saying, hey, I noticed you gained 20 pounds, but hey, I noticed you seem to eat when you're stressed. And so using words like seem to, it may be, I'm not sure, but my take, I view it as it might be. So instead of saying you gained weight or you eat junk food, it seems like you might eat junk food on certain days. What is that about? So it's the genuineness, it's the boundaries, it's the self-love too. And I think those are principles of communication that can be applied to different relationships.
They certainly can be. And then again, that idea of what you're going to do, and you can share that with someone else. If
Mm-hmm.
like if you're with a child and they're talking about how angry they are, and they're able to articulate that they're very angry about such and such or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then you normalize, you validate their experience, and like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, that is a really big emotion. That's I
Mm-hmm.
I, I understand that, or tell me more about that. But validate it and recognize that it's legitimate. And then you can also, if you need to, say, that emotion is completely fine. I understand why you have that emotion. However, you at the same time, you will not be allowed to cuss at me. You can be angry at me. I have no problem with that. But the rule in the house is you're not allowed to cuss, or you're not
Mm-hmm.
allowed to, pummel your sister, or you're not
Mm-hmm.
allowed to throw a rock through the window, whatever, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can maintain the parameters and the boundaries while still understanding and allowing the feeling, and the experience that someone is
So
having.
acknowledge and then define. So
Mhm.
so acknowledge, say, make the person feel heard, and then just say, I hear you, and for me, this is where it stops. I hear you, and also the action that you're taking when you're in this state is not acceptable to me, and I won't be okay with it. And since I'm the parent, in this case, I have discretion. And in a mutual relationship of two adults, it's really the same thing in a way. It's, hey, I hear you. I can tell it seems like you are frustrated, angry, anxious, upset. And the way you're taking action is affecting me and I'm not okay with it,
Right.
you know,
And then and maybe
or
even discussing other ways of taking up action.
right. That's
And
good too.
literally talking with, especially if it's a child, talking with ways that they might have. Do they have ideas of how else they
Hmm.
could just,
Hmm.
and then you negotiate this so that they
Hmm.
have a say in it, and they can take some ownership in saying, I will, when I'm angry, I will do this. Right.
Hmm. And and people often have ideas, so I think just seeing people and just seeing people as in control and sovereign and bright and intelligent and aware, even if they're sometimes going to periods of unawareness. So Karen, this has been awesome. I think we've touched on everything from Jungian psychology to sand play therapy, and then getting into the practical day-to-day of caregiving as well as adult relationships. And wow, we went from the top of the iceberg to the bottom and then all through the ocean. So thank you so much for joining. And is there anything you'd like to say at the end? And then where could people find you?
No, I think it's the more conscious we become, the more self-aware, the more we're able to, when we're hit by a strong emotion, if we can look at that emotion and go, wait, where is that? That has a source somewhere within me. Where is that coming from? And we become more self-aware. And that is what changes our experience. It changes our environment. That's what changes the world, really. It's our own self-awareness. So always, I think we need to take responsibility for those things. And I am located south of Venice, or actually south of Sarasota, in Venice, Florida. My website is fearlessheartcounseling.com if you'd like to visit me there. And if you're local, fearlessheartcounseling.com. Yes. And if you're local and you'd like to come and see me, give me a buzz.
Also great. I'm sure you take virtual clients too
I do in Florida for
Florida.
licensing
Great.
purposes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Awesome. All right. Awesome. I will link that in the show notes so everyone can find you. Thank you again so much.
Okay.
This was great. And
Thank you, Alex.
awesome. We'll
Appreciated
talk to you
being here.
soon.